I hadn't set foot near the townhouse in months. The place was supposed to have been our marital home bought outright with my parents' money, furnished to my taste, waiting for the day Adrian and I would finally settle down there. But life with Adrian had been a carousel of endless business trips, and nights he claimed were swallowed by meetings, so the house remained untouched. At least, that's what I thought. That afternoon, something pulled me back. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the need to feel something familiar. I parked at the curb, the quiet street unchanged except for the late autumn leaves plastered to the sidewalks. My heels clicked up the front steps. I rang the doorbell once, then again when I heard movement inside. The door opened, and there she was. A woman mid to late 20s, dark hair falling over her shoulders, stood framed in my doorway as if she owned it. In her arms, she balanced a baby, maybe a year old, cheeks flushed pink against the cold. Her eyes widened the moment she saw me, confusion flickering into something sharper. "Yes?" she asked, her tone polite but guarded. I could feel my pulse in my ears, but I smoothed my expression into the same mask I used in boardrooms. My gaze flicked briefly to the baby-round face, dark eyes, and back to her. I didn't say my name. I didn't explain that this was my house, my life she was standing in. Before I could speak, a ringtone cut through the space between us. She shifted the baby to one arm, dug her phone from her pocket, and answered without looking away from me. "Baby, what do you want?" "I'm heading back now," she said, her voice melting into syrup. The voice that answered on the other end made my spine lock in place. Adrian. My Adrian. The man who was supposed to be at a conference 2 states away. The man who rarely called me from the road unless it was about something practical: paperwork, scheduling, whether I'd paid a vendor yet. "I want that cinnamon roll from the cafe near our old university," she purred into the phone. "And flowers. Red roses would be perfect. Oh, and a necklace, you know the style I like." I froze, staring at her like she'd spoken in another language. Roses. A necklace. A cinnamon roll from across the city. In 5 years with Adrian, I had never once received a bouquet, let alone roses. He'd told me he found flowers meaningless, that he preferred to be practical in his gifts. When I'd asked for a cinnamon roll once, his answer had been a flat, "I don't like cinnamon." And here he was, indulging her every whim. "All right," Adrian's voice replied without a hint of hesitation. "I'll get them." The conversation ended, and she slipped the phone back into her pocket, her whole face softer than it had been moments ago. She adjusted the baby against her hip, and finally seemed to remember I was still there. Her eyebrows drew together, impatient now. "Who are you looking for?" I swallowed down the flood of heat rising in my chest. Everything inside me wanted to spit the truth, to demand answers, to tell her she was holding a child whose father was still legally my husband. But my father used to tell me, the first person to lose their temper loses the advantage. So I forced my features into a faint, almost apologetic smile. "Oh, sorry, wrong address." Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she muttered under her breath, "Can't people get some peace?" before nudging the door shut with her hip. The lock clicked. I turned, walking slowly down the steps, my breath even, my face calm. But inside, something cold and electric was spreading, sharpening every nerve ending. My heels hit the pavement, and I kept walking as if I had somewhere else to be, as if my chest wasn't tight with the weight of what I'd just seen and heard. I didn't need a confrontation, not yet. Not when I had no proof that could stand against his charm, his careful image. No, this would be done my way, quietly, strategically. And as I reached my car, slid into the driver's seat, and gripped the steering wheel, I realized I wasn't shaking from heartbreak. I was shaking from the clarity of purpose settling over me. She thought I was lost. She thought I'd just walk away. She had no idea I'd just found my target. I didn't get in the car right away. Instead, I wandered down the street, my hands tucked into my coat pockets, the cold air biting at my cheeks. The neighborhood was quiet, families finishing dinner, the occasional clink of dishes through open kitchen windows, the low hum of televisions behind curtains. I needed to blend in, to look like someone who belonged here, not a trespasser who'd just stumbled across a life she didn't recognize. A woman in her late 50s shuffled along the sidewalk, leash in hand, a small terrier trotting beside her. She smiled politely, and I returned it with practiced warmth. "Beautiful night," I said, as if small talk was the only thing on my mind. "It is," she agreed, adjusting her scarf. I let a few more casual comments pass before steering the conversation toward the building. I pointed, feigning casual interest. Who lives in Unit 601 of Building 3? I used to know someone around here. She followed my gaze, her expression brightening. Oh, that's a nice young couple. They seem very much in love. The words hit harder than I expected. A sharp, invisible blow to the ribs. A nice young couple. My husband and his mistress, cozy in the house my parents had paid for, presented to the world as the picture of devotion. I forced a smile, the one I used at networking events when a deal fell through, but I still needed the other party to believe I didn't care. That's lovely, I said softly, though my voice felt like it was moving through glass. Well, I should let you get on with your walk. We parted ways, but the phrase clung to me like damp wool. A nice young couple. So what was I to him? A placeholder? A business transaction? The woman with the bank account that opened every door he'd ever wanted to walk through? I returned to my car and slid into the driver's seat, my fingers curling tight around the steering wheel. Every instinct screamed at me to march back up to that door, to demand she hand me my husband on a silver platter and explain herself. But that would be messy, emotional, and useless. Confrontations without proof are just performances, and I wasn't here to put on a show. No, I would wait. Patience wasn't weakness, it was a weapon, and I had every intention of using it. I reclined the seat slightly and kept my eyes on the entrance to the building. The street lamp above me buzzed faintly, throwing yellow light across the pavement. The clock on the dashboard ticked forward, minute by minute. My breath fogged the air inside the car, but I didn't move. It was nearly 2 hours before I saw him. Adrian's silver sedan pulled into the lot like it belonged there because to him, it did. He parked with his usual precision, the headlights sweeping briefly over my windshield before shutting off. My stomach knotted, but my hands were steady as I reached for my phone. The record button glowed red on the screen. He stepped out of the car, and the sight of him was almost surreal. In one hand, he held a paper cup from that cafe near his old university, steam curling from the lid. Balanced against his arm was a small box. I didn't have to open it to know it was a cinnamon roll. In his other hand, a bouquet of red roses so large it half obscured his face. Roses. The flowers he claimed were impractical. The flowers he'd never once thought to buy for me. He didn't glance around. Didn't check if anyone was watching. He looked comfortable, at ease, like a man walking into the life he was meant to have. I kept the phone steady, zooming in as he made his way across the lot and disappeared into the building. The door closed behind him, and the image on my screen froze with a final click. I let the phone drop into my lap and exhaled slowly, my chest tight but my mind crystal clear. Now I had more than a hunch. I had the start of a trail one I would follow, piece by piece, until it led me exactly where I needed to go. The part of me that used to ache for explanations, for reasons, was gone. In its place was something sharper, colder. Adrian thought he'd built a life where I was irrelevant, where my absence from this house meant my absence from his secrets. He had no idea I was already inside them. The next morning, I didn't go to the office. Instead, I parked a discreet distance from the building and waited. The rain had started before dawn, a steady, cold curtain that blurred the street lamps and left the air smelling faintly of wet asphalt. I sipped coffee from a thermos, the heat doing nothing to soften the steel in my chest. At exactly 10:04, the building's glass doors opened, and she emerged. Serena. Her hair was tucked under a cream beret, a stroller rolling smoothly ahead of her. The baby was swaddled in a blue blanket, tiny fists poking out like punctuation marks in a sentence I didn't want to read. She didn't glance around, why would she? She thought her world was safe. I waited until she hailed a cab. When no cars stopped, she pulled out her phone, her expression tightening as she checked her rideshare app. Rain dotted the screen of her phone and darkened the hem of her coat. It was still early, but the city was in that weekday rush where every driver already had a destination. She called again, and again. Each time, no luck. The baby let out a sharp cry, and she bent to soothe him, her voice soft and coaxing. That's when I rolled forward, slowing just enough to make it seem like an afterthought. I lowered the passenger side window and leaned over. "Do you need some help?" I asked, as if I were nothing more than a passing Good Samaritan. She looked up, startled, then recognition flickered. "It's you," she said, squinting through the rain. I tilted my head in polite confusion. "I'm sorry, have we met?" She studied me for a moment. Then her mouth curved slightly. Yesterday. You rang the wrong door? Oh! I let a small, embarrassed laugh slip out, as if the memory had just clicked. Right. What a coincidence. She glanced down at her phone again, then at the rain still falling in sheets. Her hesitation lasted all of 3 seconds before she opened the door, lifted the baby from the stroller, and slid into the seat beside me. Could you take us back to where we were last night? It's miserable out. Of course, I said, starting the car. I pulled smoothly into traffic, my tone neutral, my hands steady on the wheel. She was the one who broke the silence. Were you visiting a friend in our neighborhood yesterday? I kept my eyes on the road. Something like that. She seemed satisfied, and just like that, the conversation opened. I'm Serena, by the way, she said, settling the baby on her lap. This little guy just turned 1. I glanced briefly at him in the rearview mirror. The curve of his cheekbones, the shape of his eyes, Adrian's features stamped like a signature. My grip on the steering wheel tightened a fraction, but my voice stayed light. He's adorable. Looks like his dad? Her whole face lit up. Oh, absolutely. Everyone says so. His father and I have been together since high school. Long love story. I gave her the smallest smile. That's rare these days. He's amazing, she continued, her voice warming with pride. Owns his own company, built it from nothing. Back then, he worked 3 jobs just to fund his first investment. He's brilliant with money. I nodded in all the right places, as if I were impressed, while my thumb hovered discreetly over my phone, recording every word. Each sentence was a brick in the wall I was building, evidence of the fiction Adrian had spun for her. A company built from nothing? My parents' initial investment had been 6 figures before Adrian ever signed a contract. 3 jobs? He'd never worked more than 1 at a time, and that had been under my father's guidance. Brilliant with money? If brilliant meant siphoning funds for designer bags and diamond earrings, then yes, he was a prodigy. She didn't notice the questions I didn't ask, the way I kept the conversation tilted toward her. People love to fill silence when they think they have an attentive audience. By the time we reached her building, she'd given me enough for an outline. The length of their relationship, her belief in his self-made success, and her unguarded pride in their child's resemblance to him. She didn't know she'd handed me the foundation for something much larger. As she unbuckled her seatbelt, she turned to me. We should exchange numbers just in case. You seem nice. I smiled as if flattered. Sure. We swapped contacts, and she stepped out into the rain, the baby bundled tight against her chest. I watched her disappear inside before I ended the recording and saved it twice. Once to the phone, once to the cloud. My pulse had steadied, my mind already calculating the next move. She thought I was a coincidence, but she was my first deliberate step. Over the next 2 weeks, I became an expert at coincidence. If Serena liked a certain cafe in the financial district, I was suddenly there one morning, laptop open, nursing a cappuccino until she arrived. If she browsed the jewelry counters at the upscale department store on 5th, I just happened to be shopping for a gift a few cases down. Always pleasant, always surprised to see her, never too eager. People are wary of those who insert themselves too quickly. But if you let them believe fate is the one making the introductions, they'll start to think you were meant to be in their life. Serena seemed almost charmed by it. We keep bumping into each other, she laughed one afternoon, holding a shopping bag with a discreet designer logo. It must be a sign. I smiled, tilting my head just enough to let the light catch the gold pendant at my neck, one of my more understated pieces, but still something that whispered wealth. Maybe it is. She began inviting me to lunch, always at restaurants with long wine lists and unpronounceable menu items. I never refused. I knew what she saw. A well-dressed woman who ordered without looking at the price, who didn't blink at adding a bottle of champagne to the table just because. She was trying to measure herself against me, and in doing so, she revealed exactly where Adrian's money was going. When we'd first met, she carried a simple leather tote functional, moderately priced. Now, barely 3 weeks later, she was draping limited edition handbags over the backs of restaurant chairs, the kind that waitlists and social media influencers turn into trophies. Her shoes bore red soles. The watch on her wrist was a brand that made people stop and look twice. I didn't have to guess how she was paying for any of it. Serena didn't have a job, she'd told me as much between bites of truffle pasta. And I knew Adrian, even if his taste in women had sunk, his taste in appearances hadn't. I played the role of confidant easily. letting her talk, keeping my questions open-ended. People like Serena can't resist bragging. It's oxygen to them. She would lean in, conspiratorial, and let the numbers slip like they were just amusing details. One of the boutiques had this limited drop, only 10 pieces in the country, she told me one day over lunch, gesturing to the crocodile clutch beside her plate. 30,000, but totally worth it. I nodded as if 30,000 on a handbag were the kind of everyday indulgence I could understand. In truth, I was memorizing every number, every brand, every little slip of information. A few days later, it was a diamond tennis bracelet, only 22,000. Can you believe the deal I got? Then a weekend shopping trip to Paris, which sounded suspiciously like a long layover in the airport boutique but still came with the claim of a 15-0 watch. I didn't have to write any of it down in the moment. Later, when I got home, I went back through our text threads, where she often sent photos of her new acquisitions like a child showing off good grades. My phone became an archive. Side shots of handbags, close-ups of jewelry, candid mirror selfies in dresses that cost more than some cars. Alongside them were her own captions, each one naming the item, the price, and sometimes, without realizing it, the source. Adrian said I deserved a treat after a hard week. Look what he got me. Can you believe he found this necklace? 10,000, and it matches my earrings perfectly. Every screenshot went into a separate, locked folder, backed up to an encrypted drive. By the time the month was over, I'd documented over $100,000 worth of gifts. All bought, as far as I was concerned, with marital assets he was funneling into his mistress's vanity. It was the kind of proof that spoke louder than any confrontation ever could. In a courtroom, numbers strip away charm. They turn romance into theft, affection into financial misconduct, and that's exactly what I was building toward. Still, I kept my demeanor warm, even friendly, when I saw her. Let her think I admired her taste, that I was amused by her stories of extravagant generosity. She never once stopped to wonder why I didn't flinch at the numbers, why I never seemed impressed enough to envy her. Because envy wasn't what I felt. What I felt was precision. Every lunch, every accidental meeting, every glittering trinket she flaunted was another stitch in the net I was tightening around both her and Adrian. And when it finally closed, they wouldn't even see it coming until they were already tangled. It was a Thursday evening when Adrian mentioned the dinner. He was standing in the doorway of my study, adjusting his cufflinks, smelling faintly of cologne. "Big night," he said, almost to himself. "A few key clients are in town, should be good for business." I didn't look up from my laptop right away. "I'll go with you," I said casually, as if the thought had just crossed my mind. The silence that followed was thick enough to taste. When I did glance up, his face was a mask of polite confusion. "What?" "I'll come," I repeated, closing the laptop. "It's been a while since I've met any of your clients. Might be nice to put faces to names." He hesitated, clearly recalculating something in his head. "It's just business talk, Lila. Boring." I stood, smoothing the front of my dress. "Business talk doesn't bore me. After all, I am part of the business." That last sentence left him with no graceful way to refuse. At the restaurant, the maitre d' led us to a private room where 3 men in tailored suits stood chatting by the window. Adrian did the introductions, but before he could steer the conversation, I extended my hand with an easy smile. "Lila Merrick," I said, meeting each of their eyes in turn. "The actual founder of Summit Edge Capital." That word "actual" hung in the air just long enough for Adrian to stiffen beside me. The clients exchanged surprised glances, clearly caught off guard. Adrian had always been the face of the company, the one shaking hands, giving the speeches, closing the deals. But he hadn't built it. My parents' investment had done that, and my early strategy work had given it legs. "I've heard a lot about you," one of the men said. "All good, I hope," I replied, letting the smile reach my eyes. From there, I didn't wait to be invited into the conversation, I took it. I asked them about their recent projects, shared insights about market shifts, and referenced past deals only someone deeply embedded in the company would know. By the end of the night, the conversation was flowing easily between me and the clients. They laughed at my dry observations, leaned in when I spoke, and began to address both of us instead of just Adrian. He smiled on the surface, but I could see the tension in the set of his jaw. After that night, I didn't ask to attend meetings, I simply told Adrian I was going, always with the same pleasant tone, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. If it's important enough for you, it's important enough for me, I'd say. The first few times he tried to limit my involvement. This is more in my lane, he'd murmur before we walked into a room. But I didn't stay quiet once we were inside. I offered solutions, suggested angles on deals, sometimes even caught details he'd overlooked. Clients noticed. And people talk. Within a month, I had moved from being Adrian's wife in introductions to Lila, who you'll want to meet about this. My name started appearing in CC lines. Clients began sending documents to my email instead of his. The shift was subtle but deliberate. When a payment came in, I would suggest it be routed through the account I managed for efficiency. When a new deal was being finalized, I would offer to handle the follow-up so Adrian could focus on other priorities. He didn't see it for what it was not yet. He thought I was helping, thought I was smoothing his path, playing the supportive partner. And I let him think that, because a man who believes he's in control won't fight you for the wheel until it's far too late. Every handshake I initiated, every meeting I dominated, every payment redirected it, all moved the center of gravity away from him and toward me. I was no longer orbiting his version of the company. The company was shifting to orbit mine. By the end of the quarter, the balance was undeniable. Several of his long-standing accounts were now working directly with me. Payments that once went to his channels were arriving in mine without him even noticing until the bookkeeping caught up. If he suspected anything, he didn't show it. Or maybe he didn't want to admit it, even to himself. He still came home with that smug satisfaction after meetings, not realizing the relationships he thought were his alone had quietly changed hands. He had spent years thinking I was just the financial backing, the silent partner in the shadows. But I had never been silent. I had been patient. And now, with every passing week, his grip was loosening. He just didn't know yet that by the time he reached for it again, there would be nothing left for him to hold. It started with a text just after noon. "You won't believe this. Drinks tonight to celebrate." No explanation, just a string of champagne emojis and a location pin for an upscale bar in the West End. Serena thrived on theatrics, so I knew the celebration would be about something she wanted the world, or at least me, to envy. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting at a corner table with a view of the city lights. Her hair was glossy, her lipstick a perfect wine red, and beside her sat an open folder spilling glossy real estate photos across the table. I barely had to ask, "Isn't it gorgeous?" She gushed, sliding one of the pictures toward me. A sprawling villa, all glass and steel and manicured gardens, stood like a magazine spread come to life. 7.8 million, fully furnished, and the keys are mine. I traced a finger along the image as if admiring the design. "That's quite the purchase." She leaned back, smug. "Why settle for less when you deserve the best?" Adrian insisted. The name was a blade disguised as a compliment, and I let it slide over me without flinching. I'm sure he did. The evening turned into a performance, her flipping through images, describing imported marble countertops, the wine cellar, the view from the infinity pool. With every boast, I smiled, nodded, let her revel in the idea that I was impressed. Inside, I was cataloging every word, every detail, adding them to the growing ledger of her indulgence. By her third martini, her edges began to fray. Her laughter was louder, her gestures looser. She called for another round, and I made sure the waiter kept them coming, each drink tipping her further from polished to unguarded. It happened between sips of champagne and a bite of some overpriced appetizer. She set her glass down with a thunk and leaned in, her voice lowering like she was about to confess something delicious. "You know," she began, eyes glassy, "I have everything I've ever wanted, except one thing." I tilted my head, the picture of polite curiosity. "Oh? There's someone I just can't stand. A thorn in my side." Her lips curled. "Every time I think about her, it makes me sick." The air between us sharpened. I didn't move, didn't blink. "What did she do to you?" Her fingers toyed with the stem of her glass. "She exists," she laughed then. A sharp, ugly sound. "If she didn't, Adrian and I would be perfect. No distractions. No complications." I felt my stomach tighten, but my expression stayed smooth. "That's a strong thing to say." Serena's laugh died into something colder. "Strong, but true. If she were gone, if she just stopped being around, he'd be mine completely. No divided attention, no pretending." Her hand slipped, knocking over an empty glass. The clatter drew a glance from the bartender, but she waved it off, leaning closer until I could smell the mix of alcohol and expensive perfume. "You think I'm just talking, don't you?" she whispered. "I've thought about it. Really thought about it." In my coat pocket, my phone was already recording, my thumb having tapped the screen minutes earlier when her voice took that edge. I kept my own tone light, careful. "That sounds dangerous," she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Sometimes dangerous is necessary." The moment stretched between us, long enough for me to feel the weight of what she'd just said. This wasn't idle jealousy. This wasn't harmless posturing. Serena wasn't just a mistress in love with the sound of her own voice. She was someone willing to imagine a world where I no longer drew breath. I eased back in my chair, forcing a laugh to break the tension. "You're drunk," I said, letting her save face. "You'll regret saying things like that in the morning." But she didn't take the lifeline. "No," she said simply, finishing her drink in one swallow. "I won't." I stayed another 20 minutes, steering the conversation back to safe topics until her words could be dismissed as too much liquor. When she finally swayed toward the door, I offered a polite goodbye and slipped into the night air. In the quiet of my car, I replayed the recording, listening to the slur in her voice, the way her tone dropped into something raw and deliberate. Each sentence was proof, not of petty rivalry, but of intent. Until now, Serena had been a problem I could dismantle methodically, through contracts and courtrooms. But that night, she became something else entirely, a threat that wouldn't be solved by paperwork alone. And as the rain-slicked streets reflected the city lights, I knew I'd just crossed into a different kind of game, one where survival mattered as much as winning. After that night with Serena, her words clung to me like smoke. If she didn't exist, it wasn't an idle jab. There had been weight behind it, a certain flatness in her tone that told me she'd thought about it more than once. And if she was willing to say it aloud to me, how many times had she whispered it to Adrian? How many times had she tried to make him see the solution she wanted? I started watching him more closely. In the weeks that followed, Adrian became attentive, too attentive. He came home earlier, sometimes carrying my favorite takeout, sometimes insisting on cooking dinner himself. He asked what I wanted for breakfast, made sure my tea was brewed exactly the way I liked it. To anyone else, it might have looked like a husband trying to mend cracks in his marriage. To me, it felt staged, too deliberate, too sudden. And beneath that polished warmth, I sensed calculation. "The first time I refused a meal," he pressed. "Just try a little. You've barely eaten today." I gave him a polite smile and said I'd already eaten at the office. He didn't argue, but something in his expression hardened, just for a second, before the smile returned. That's when I decided to test a theory I prayed I was wrong about. The next evening, when he left for the gym, I took the untouched portion of dinner from the fridge and carefully set it aside. The following day, I came home with a small pet carrier. Inside was a pale, fluffy hamster, an easy purchase from a shop that didn't ask questions. I told Adrian I'd picked it up on a whim. "It's cute," he said, barely looking up from his phone. "Keep it if you want." That night, when he cooked again, I pretended to eat, then quietly fed a few pieces of vegetables from my plate to the hamster. I watched it nibble happily, whiskers twitching, then made a note of the time. I repeated the process for days. The hamster remained healthy, darting around its wheel, storing seeds in its cheeks. After a week, I began to think maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe all of this was just my mind sharpening shadows into shapes that weren't there. Then, exactly 2 weeks later, I came home to silence. The hamster wasn't on its wheel. It lay curled in a corner of the cage, its tiny body trembling. When it lifted its head, I saw a smear of red at the corner of its mouth. My stomach dropped. I opened the cage and scooped it into my hands, feeling the frantic thump of its heartbeat. It tried to move, but its little body convulsed. And then, it went still. For a long moment, I couldn't move. I just sat there, my hands trembling, the weight of that tiny creature suddenly enormous. My breath came in shallow bursts, my skin prickled as the realization settled in. This wasn't a coincidence. The hamster had eaten what I'd been served, and now it was dead. A cold wave rushed through me, starting at the base of my spine and crawling upward until it settled like ice in my chest. My first thought wasn't anger, it was clarity. If Adrian could feed something harmful to me through my meals, he could blame whatever happened next on illness, stress, anything. People die suddenly all the time. And if Serena was whispering in his ear, urging him to make the problem go away, then maybe, in his mind, this was the simplest way. I cleaned the cage with methodical precision, bagged the bedding and the body, and carried it out to the trash. My hands felt steady now, but only because I was running on something sharper than fear resolve. This wasn't just about infidelity anymore. It wasn't even about money. This was survival. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the apartment, every shift in the shadows, made my senses spike. When Adrian came home late and peeked into the bedroom, I kept my breathing slow and even, pretending to sleep. I felt his gaze linger, then heard the soft click of the door as he moved to the guest room. The next morning, I packed a small suitcase. I told him I'd be staying with my parents for a few days to be closer to the office. He smiled, said he understood, kissed me on the cheek. But as I wheeled my bag to the door, I knew I wasn't leaving for a break. I was leaving because the moment you confirm someone is willing to harm you, you don't give them another chance to try. The morning after the hamster died, I knew I couldn't sleep under the same roof as Adrian again. The thought of eating anything from our kitchen made my stomach knot, and the idea of letting him stand behind me close enough to touch felt like playing roulette with my life. But leaving had to be done carefully. If he sensed I was running, he might try to stop me. I took my time packing, keeping the movements casual, slow. A neat stack of work clothes, a few pairs of shoes, my laptop, toiletries all slid into the suitcase without hurry. When I zipped it shut, the sound seemed too loud in the stillness of the bedroom. Adrian came in just as I was wheeling it toward the door. Going somewhere? His tone was light, but his eyes lingered on the suitcase too long. I gave him the smallest of smiles. I'm going to stay with my parents for a few days. The commute to the office is wearing me out, and it's closer from their place. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, studying me. If you're tired, we should take a trip. Just the two of us. France, maybe? You love Paris. The suggestion was meant to sound generous, spontaneous. To me, it sounded like an open invitation to let him control every variable. My voice stayed even. Maybe once things settle down at the office. Right now isn't a good time. He pushed off the frame and stepped closer. Lila, you've been on edge. Let me take care of you. Money's not an issue, we can go anywhere you want. My fingers tightened on the suitcase handle. I'll think about it, I said, which was neither yes nor no. It was just enough to let him believe he still had a thread to hold on to. He searched my face for something, maybe hesitation, maybe guilt. Whatever he thought he saw, it was enough. He nodded once, almost to himself, then smiled. All right, go get some rest at your parents' place. I walked out without looking back. At the office later that day, I found him in his corner office, on a call. His voice was muffled, but I caught the tail end, something about a meeting later. He stepped into the private bathroom attached to his office, the door closing behind him. His phone was on the desk, screen facing up. I wasn't the kind of person who snooped through devices, but that rule no longer applied to a man who'd likely tried to poison me. When the screen lit up with a notification, my gaze locked on it. Serena's name. The preview was short but sharp enough to cut through me. Are you hesitating? Do you actually have feelings for her? Before I could even process that, another one flashed across the screen. If you can't do it, I will. My pulse pounded in my ears. I picked up the phone. It was locked, of course. I tried our anniversary date, no luck. His birthday, nothing. Then I remembered a photo Serena had once posted online. A necklace Adrian had supposedly given her, engraved with numbers. At the time, it seemed like a romantic flourish. Now, I saw it for what it was, a code. I entered the numbers from memory, pairing them with his birth year. The screen unlocked. The chat history was nearly wiped clean, only today's messages visible. But those 2 lines were enough. If you can't do it, I will. The words sat there, black and unyielding on white. I tapped the screenshot button. Once, twice, saving the images to my phone. Then I opened my secure cloud storage and backed them up again. Footsteps from the bathroom made me lock the phone and set it back exactly where it had been. I stepped away from the desk, flipping open a file on the conference table as though I'd been reviewing numbers. The door opened. Adrian came out, drying his hands on a paper towel, smiling like nothing in the world was amiss. Need something? I looked up from the file, my expression calm. No, just going over the quarterly figures. He nodded and moved behind his desk, picking up the phone without suspicion. I left the room, my face neutral, my pace unhurried, but inside, the decision was already made. The texts were proof. Whatever doubts I'd had about Serena's drunken threats were gone. Between her malice and Adrian's compliance, there was no question they were willing to act. The exit I'd staged that morning wasn't just about convenience anymore. It was about survival, and from here on out, every step I took would be toward dismantling them both, piece by careful piece. The decision came to me that night like a clean, sharp break in a pane of glass. No more collecting evidence for some distant courtroom battle. No more letting Adrian think he had control. If I moved now, I could gut him where it would hurt most in the company he'd been parading around as if it were his alone. The next morning, I sent out a company-wide email. Mandatory meeting at 10:30 a.m. in the main conference room. No agenda, no explanation. Just the kind of summons that makes people show up early and whisper in the hallways. By the time I walked in, the room was full. Department heads, assistants, account managers, they were all there. Adrian sat near the end of the long table, looking mildly annoyed but not concerned. He was scrolling through his phone, clearly expecting this to be another quarterly pep talk. I didn't bother sitting. Instead, I walked straight to the head of the table and connected my phone to the projector. The first image hit the wall in perfect clarity. Serena, holding her baby, standing in the doorway of the townhouse my parents had paid for. A ripple went through the room. Adrian's head jerked up. "This," I began, my voice steady, "is Serena Vale. You'll be hearing her name a lot today." I tapped the screen. The next image appeared Serena and Adrian together, smiling for a mirror selfie, her hand on his chest, a new diamond bracelet glinting under the light. I let the murmurs swell before continuing. For the last year, Adrian has been using company funds to maintain an affair with Ms. Vale, funds that should have gone toward client projects, operational growth, or employee bonuses have instead purchased. I clicked again, bringing up a spreadsheet over $120,000 in personal gifts. The columns glowed on the wall. Dates, items, amounts, designer handbags, watches, jewelry, even a villa down payment that matched a suspicious miscellaneous expense in our ledgers. Adrian pushed back his chair. "Lila, what the hell are you doing?" I ignored him. With another swipe, audio filled the room. Serena's voice, warm and gushing, saying, "Adrian bought me this for $30,000, he says. I deserve the best." Then another clip, her drunken tones slurring into venom. "If she didn't exist, we'd be perfect." The room had gone utterly still, except for the faint hiss of the speakers. I straightened, letting my gaze sweep across the faces in front of me. Summit Edge Capital was founded with my parents' investment and my strategic work. Adrian Cross has no legal ownership in this company. Effective immediately, he is no longer employed here, and all access to company accounts, systems, and contacts will be revoked as soon as this meeting ends. Gasps broke out. Adrian's face flushed crimson. "You can't just—" "Oh, I can," I cut in, my tone colder now. "The board has already been informed. They have copies of the same evidence you're seeing now. You've been using our resources to finance your mistress's lifestyle, and you've done it under the pretense of legitimate expenses. That's fraud, Adrian. Not a bad quarter, not a disagreement in strategy. Fraud." He started down the length of the table toward me, but no one moved to stop him. They just watched. I held his gaze, unmoving. "Sit down, Adrian. Or better yet, leave. You've embarrassed yourself enough for one day." He stopped just short of me, his jaw tight, his voice pitched low. "We could have handled this privately. You didn't have to make a scene." I let out a short laugh. "Privately? So you could spin it? So you could salvage your image with half-truths? No. Everyone in this room deserves to know exactly who they've been working beside and what you've been doing with the trust they gave you." For a moment, we just stared at each other. Then I stepped back, giving him space toward the door. "Security will escort you out." His eyes flickered, not fear. Not yet, but something close to the realization that he'd just lost the only arena where he thought he was untouchable. He turned sharply, striding toward the exit without another word. The door shut behind him, and the air in the room shifted, a collective exhale that felt like the first true breath I'd taken in months. I looked back at the faces around the table. Some were shocked, others grimly satisfied. "We have work to do," I said simply. This company is moving forward without him. And just like that, I turned off the projector, gathered my phone, and walked out not in retreat, but in full possession of the ground beneath my feet. The call came less than an hour after Adrian was escorted out of the building. I didn't recognize the number at first, but the moment I answered, the voice on the other end was unmistakable. You manipulative bitch. Serena's words spat through the line like acid. Do you have any idea what you've done? I leaned back in my chair, letting her fury roll over me without so much as a twitch. Hello to you too, Serena. You think this is funny? You humiliated him. In front of everyone. You've ruined his reputation, his career, our life. She broke off, as if her breath couldn't keep up with the pace of her anger. Do you realize he'll never get another job at this level again? How are we supposed to survive now? I let a beat of silence stretch before answering. My voice measured. You mean, how are you supposed to survive without access to company funds? You think you're so clever, she snapped, her tone jagged with resentment. But you don't understand. He loved me. He gave me everything. And you, her voice cracked into a sneer, you took it all away because you're jealous. That made me laugh, not loudly, just enough for it to register. Jealous? Serena, I'm not sure what's funnier, the idea that I'd be jealous of a woman whose only real skill is spending someone else's money, or the fact that you think I care about his love. You trapped him, she shouted, the words hot with outrage. You deceived me from the start, pretending to be my friend just to collect dirt. Who does that? My fingers tapped idly against the desk. Pretending to be your friend wasn't necessary. You volunteered every single detail yourself. Every receipt, every price tag, every brag. You were the one who posed with the handbags, the jewelry, the villa. You were the one who said on recording that Adrian is the father of your child, that you've been together since high school, that you'd be better off if I didn't exist. I didn't put those words in your mouth. You did. There was a sharp intake of breath on her end, and for a moment, I could almost hear her scrambling for a counterattack. You twisted it all, she hissed. It wasn't supposed to be like this. No, I agreed evenly. It was supposed to be quiet, discreet. I was supposed to keep pretending I didn't see what was right in front of me while you two bled my marriage and my company dry. But you both made one fatal mistake. You underestimated how much I pay attention. Her voice went shrill. You're cruel. You've destroyed our future. I let my tone cool another few degrees. No, Serena. I didn't destroy your future. Adrian did, the moment he started funneling company funds into your shopping sprees and real estate dreams. You simply helped him spend it. Actions have consequences, and I'm not in the business of cushioning the fall for people who tried to poison me out of the picture. There was a pause long enough that I knew she'd heard the word poison for exactly what it was. She didn't deny it. Finally, she tried a different tack, her voice low and almost pleading. If you cared about him at all, you could have handled it privately. You didn't have to ruin him in front of the entire company. I smiled to myself, though my voice stayed flat. Handled it privately, so you could both rewrite the narrative? So he could keep the sympathy of people who don't know the truth? No. This way, there's no misunderstanding about why he's gone. Her tone cracked into desperation. You'll regret this. You can't just... I can, I cut in, my patience thinning. And I have. This isn't about regret, Serena. This is about ensuring neither of you ever has the chance to pull this on someone else. I owe you nothing, not your comfort, not your survival, and certainly not your delusions about what you and Adrian were to each other. She made a sound that was half curse, half sob. You're heartless. I leaned forward, my voice calm, almost quiet. Heartless? No. Heartless would have been letting you believe I didn't know what you were capable of, and then letting you keep circling until you found another way to strike. This, Serena, is mercy. The next part, I let the pause hang just long enough for her to feel it, will not be. I ended the call before she could respond. The dial tone filled the room for a second before I set the phone down and exhaled slowly. Her rage didn't shake me, it only confirmed what I already knew. She wasn't going to let this go. And that was fine. I wasn't finished with her either. The lawsuit was the natural next step. I had the evidence, the paper trail, the recordings. There was no point in dragging it out with theatrics when the numbers alone were enough to cut through any story Adrian's lawyer might try to spin. My attorney filed the paperwork within days, citing misuse of marital and company assets, breach of fiduciary duty, and fraud. Adrian didn't fight the facts he couldn't. The receipts were his handwriting. The transfers came from accounts he'd managed. The expenses all linked back to Serena. Every dollar spent without my consent was laid out in black and white. I could almost see the weight of it pressing down on him during our first court hearing, though he tried to sit tall, jaw tight, wearing that same tailored suit he'd favored when pretending to be untouchable. I wasn't out to destroy him financially just for sport, but I wasn't about to let him walk away with the fruits of my labor or my family's investment. My attorney made sure of that. Anything acquired before the marriage was off the table. The company, Summit Edge Capital, had been established with my parents' funds, and the operating agreements left Adrian with no actual ownership. The court saw it the same way. When the judgment came down, it was clean and final. I would retain control of the company and the bulk of our shared assets. Adrian would leave with a settlement of $500,000, enough for him to start over, as the judge phrased it. I didn't bother pointing out that, in his case, starting over likely meant finding someone else to bankroll his ambitions. Serena didn't bother showing up to the proceedings, but I knew she was waiting for him outside, leaning against the hood of a car she hadn't paid for, his sunglasses, hiding whatever expression she wore when she heard the number. $500,000. For some people, it would be security. For her, I suspected it was simply the starting balance on her next spending spree. I was right. Within a week, I started hearing whispers from mutual acquaintances who'd spotted them in the usual luxury haunts, designer boutiques, exclusive watch dealers, even a weekend getaway to a spa resort that ran $20,000 for 3 nights. Serena was photographed more than once carrying shopping bags that could feed a family of 4 for a year. 2 weeks after the settlement hit his account, they were on social media, toasting with champagne in a suite overlooking the coast. By the 3rd week, the photos shifted. Serena, with a new diamond ring, on a different finger, but still calculated for effect. Serena draped in a fur coat. Serena posing in front of a car that cost more than some houses. By the end of the first month, the money was gone. I don't know if Adrian realized how quickly it had bled out, or if he was too busy trying to keep up with the illusion that he was still the man who could give her everything. But I do know the fight started then. It was inevitable. Serena had gotten used to limitless spending, and Adrian, stripped of the company, stripped of my accounts, wasn't a man who could keep that pace. I didn't need to be in the room to imagine how it went. Serena, all sharp edges and accusations, demanding to know why he was holding back now. Adrian, defensive and bitter, blaming her for draining him. Every argument would be another crack in whatever fantasy they'd built together. And eventually, the cracks split wide. I heard about the breakup through someone at the club who'd overheard Serena venting to a friend. Apparently, it had ended in a screaming match that left Adrian storming out and Serena calling him every name but his own. She told her friend she was done with broke men, and that she'd wasted enough time on someone who promised the world but couldn't deliver. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd spent years clinging to him, convinced she'd won some grand prize, only to end up exactly where she started searching for her next mark. Adrian, for his part, faded from view. Without the company to prop up his image and without Serena to parade around as proof of his desirability, he became just another man with a reputation that preceded him in all the wrong ways. It would have been easy to gloat, to take satisfaction in watching them implode under the weight of their own greed. But the truth was, I didn't need to. The breakup, the financial collapse, the public humiliation, they were just natural consequences. I hadn't forced them into anything they hadn't chosen for themselves. All I'd done was stop paying the bill. Chapter 12. The Collision. It was late, a little past 11, when I left the office. The streets were quiet, washed in that amber glow from the old street lamps, the kind of stillness that made the city feel smaller, almost manageable. My mind was still half on a client proposal as I eased my car onto a side road, one I liked to take when I wanted to avoid the main traffic lights. That's when I saw her. A taxi passed in the opposite lane, but in the instant our headlights crossed, I caught a flash of her face in the front passenger seat. Serena. Even in that fraction of a second, I recognized the tilt of her jaw, the set of her mouth, and in her eyes just before the cars passed there was something sharp, almost electric. I kept driving. I didn't slow, didn't swerve, but in my rearview mirror, I saw the taxi brake hard. Then, impossibly, it made a sharp U-turn. The headlights grew larger, brighter, until they filled the mirror entirely. My pulse jumped. The taxi was accelerating, the engine straining. And then I saw it. Serena's hand, white-knuckled on the steering wheel, her body leaning across the driver's side. She was fighting the man for control of his own vehicle. Her mouth was moving, yelling, maybe screaming, but all I could hear was the blood pounding in my ears. It didn't take a genius to understand what she was trying to do. I tightened my grip on the wheel and focused, scanning the road ahead. At the last possible moment, just as the taxi lunged closer, I jerked the wheel right, my tires biting into the shoulder. The cab swerved past, missing my rear bumper by inches, but she didn't stop. Through the glare, I could see her still wrestling the wheel, still trying to turn the car toward me. The driver, desperate, yanked it back hard. The taxi fishtailed, tires shrieking against the pavement. And then impact. The sound was brutal. Metal on wood and bark splintering as the taxi slammed full force into a thick roadside tree. The headlights flickered once, then went dark. For a moment, the world went silent. I sat frozen in my seat, hands still locked on the wheel, my breath shallow. Then movement caught my eye, a figure stepping out of a nearby doorway, phone already to their ear. I heard the faint echo of their voice. "Yes, there's been an accident. Send an ambulance now." I pulled my car to the side and stepped out, my heels crunching against the gravel. The front of the taxi was mangled, the hood crumpled in on itself. Steam hissed into the night air. The driver's door swung open and a man stumbled out, his face pale, hands shaking. He glanced at me, eyes wide with something between fear and disbelief. She tried to grab the wheel," he stammered. She said you." His words broke off in a cough. I looked at the passenger side. Serena wasn't moving. The paramedics arrived within minutes, the flashing lights painting the whole street in red and blue. They worked quickly, cutting her seatbelt, stabilizing her neck, lifting her onto a stretcher. Her eyes fluttered open briefly, unfocused, before closing again. I followed the police back to the station to give my statement. It wasn't difficult, their own accident reconstruction would tell the same story, and the driver was already corroborating it. I told them exactly what had happened, how she'd recognized me, how she'd forced the taxi into a maneuver that could have killed us both. In the days that followed, the hospital confirmed the extent of her injuries. Severe head trauma, swelling in the brain. When she woke, she wasn't the same. Her speech was slow, her memory fractured, her thinking dulled. The fire in her had been replaced by a fog she couldn't shake. Some might have taken that as enough a twist of fate that had neutralized the threat without further action. But I'd learned better than to trust in chance. I pressed charges. Attempted murder, reckless endangerment, assault on the driver. The evidence was overwhelming. My statement, the driver's account, the eyewitness, the crash data, the recordings of her earlier threats. The trial didn't take long. Even in her diminished state, the weight of the proof was undeniable. The judge's voice was steady when the sentence came down. Life in prison, without the possibility of parole. When it was over, I walked out of the courthouse into a crisp, clear afternoon. The sun was bright, almost too bright after the months of shadows I'd been navigating. I didn't feel triumphant, not exactly. What I felt was something quieter, heavier, a finality that closed one chapter for good. Serena was gone from my life, locked away where she couldn't reach me again. And yet, I knew this wasn't the end, because there was still Adrian, and his part in all of this was far from finished. When the call came from Detective Hughes, I knew it wasn't just a follow-up. His voice carried that clipped efficiency he only used when the case was airtight. "We've traced the toxicology results back to substances purchased on Adrian's corporate card," he said. "And the lab confirmed same compound found in the hamster and in the samples we collected from your kitchen." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I'd suspected. I'd tested. I'd even proven it to myself. But hearing it from the police, knowing it was now a matter of record, made it hit differently. This wasn't just betrayal, it was premeditated erasure. The arrest happened 2 days later. I didn't watch it in person, but the footage circulated in our company's internal group chat. Adrian, in his tailored navy suit, was led out of his condo in handcuffs, head lowered as reporters shouted his name. Serena's old villa had been sold off by then. She was already rotting in a cell for life, and now it was his turn. The trial was almost anticlimactic. My legal team and the prosecution worked in seamless coordination. We had receipts for the purchases, surveillance footage of him picking up the chemicals, And, damningly, a chain of text messages to Serena where he joked about me being a slow learner. The jury didn't need long 3 hours of deliberation, tops. 7 years. That was the sentence. Not as long as I'd hoped, but long enough to strip away the image he'd built for himself. Long enough for him to know what it felt like to be powerless. I thought that was the end of it, that he'd serve his time quietly, stewing in the consequences of his choices. But one rainy Thursday afternoon, almost 6 months after he'd been incarcerated, I got a letter requesting a visit. The prison's visitation room was as drab as every cliché suggested. Linoleum floors, scuffed tables bolted to the ground, and a faint smell of disinfectant that clung to your skin. Adrian was already sitting at one of the tables when the guard led me in. He'd lost weight, his cheekbones sharper, his once polished hair now cropped short. The suit had been replaced with an orange jumpsuit that did nothing for his vanity. He looked up as I sat down. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, regret, maybe, or the rehearsed shadow of it. "Lila," he began, voice softer than I remembered. "I asked you here because I need you to know I did love you." I almost laughed. Almost. Love? I leaned forward slightly, keeping my tone measured. "Is that what you call slipping poison into my food? Is that what you call conspiring with your mistress to get me out of the way?" He winced but didn't look away. "It wasn't supposed to be like that. Serena, she was reckless. She pushed for things I wasn't ready to." I cut him off with a raised hand. "Stop. You had every opportunity to walk away, to face me like a man, to end it without playing God with my life. You didn't. You chose the ugliest route because it was easier for you than telling the truth." He swallowed hard, his gaze dropping to the table between us. "I made mistakes. Mistakes are forgetting an anniversary or misplacing your keys," I said, my voice cool. "You committed crimes. Against me. Against your own vows. And now you're here. Because you earned it." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he tried again, quieter. "I did love you. I stood, pushing my chair back just enough to make the legs scrape the floor. "Your love is too cheap for me, Adrian. It always was." His mouth opened as if to reply, but I was already signaling the guard. Walking out of that room, I felt no dramatic swell of triumph, no cinematic sense of closure, just a clean, precise severing. Whatever rope had tethered me to the man I once thought I knew was gone. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the pavement slick and shining. I inhaled deeply, the air smelling faintly of wet stone and exhaust. 7 years was a long time, but not long enough for him to undo what he'd done. Still, it was enough for me to live freely, without the shadow of his presence behind me. I didn't look back at the building as I left. There was nothing worth seeing. Success didn't arrive like a thunderclap, it came in measured, deliberate steps. It was in the long hours spent poring over quarterly reports, in the late-night strategy sessions with my core team, in the quiet, consistent decisions that rebuilt the company from the inside out. After Adrian's removal, there was a vacuum, but I filled it quickly and decisively. I streamlined departments, cut loose deadweight contracts he'd signed to impress friends, and reinvested in our most loyal employees. People who had once glanced nervously at me in the hallway now looked me in the eye, trusting my direction. In less than 2 years, revenue had tripled. The company wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. With growth came invitations. Industry conferences wanted me as a keynote speaker. Awards committees shortlisted me for leadership honors. And then came the personal invitations, the ones slipped into conversations over champagne at events. A widower in real estate, a divorced venture capitalist, a surgeon who respected a woman who could handle herself in business. All charming enough in their tailored suits, all convinced that beneath my composure I must be looking for someone to share the load. They were wrong. Even my own family, relieved and perhaps a little proud of how I'd weathered the storm, began hinting that it might be time to move on in the romantic sense. My mother couched it in gentle phrases, "You deserve companionship, Lila," while my cousin Sonia was blunt, "You can't just work forever. What's the point of all this if you don't share it?" I didn't argue. I didn't try to make them understand that what I'd built wasn't a placeholder until another man arrived to claim it. It was the point. My independence wasn't a stopgap. It was the reward. I had clawed my way out of a marriage where my survival depended on someone else's whims. Why on earth would I ever volunteer for that cage again? I learned to smile politely and deflect. Maybe one day, I'd say, which really meant never. The truth was, I loved my life exactly as it was. I loved unlocking my office early in the morning, the city skyline still wrapped in dawn light. I loved reviewing contracts without anyone second-guessing me. I loved knowing every major decision the company made ran through my mind first. There was no one to undermine me, no one to poison my food or my ambition. And if there were nights when the silence of my penthouse felt a little too still, I didn't fill it with strangers. I filled it with music, with books, with the hum of plans taking shape. My happiness was no longer tied to someone else's approval. That's how I found myself, one crisp autumn morning, sitting at the head of our new boardroom table. It was an oval slab of polished walnut, custom made to seat 18, but all eyes were on me. Around it sat a mix of investors, department heads, and new board members, men and women who had watched me not only hold the company together through scandal, but push it into a golden era. I wore a deep charcoal suit, silk blouse the color of midnight, no wedding ring, no apology for its absence. On the table before me, the agenda was neatly stacked beside my leather-bound notebook. "We've just closed the second-best quarter in our company's history," I began, my voice carrying easily in the acoustically tuned room. "And we did it without cutting corners, without compromising our ethics, and without pandering to trends that would have diluted our brand. That is not luck. That is leadership, strategy, and teamwork." A ripple of quiet pride moved through the room. I continued, outlining our expansion into 2 new markets, the partnerships we were finalizing, the charitable foundation we'd just launched to mentor young women in business. I saw nods, scribbled notes, the spark of ambition mirrored in the faces around me. Somewhere in the middle of the meeting, it struck me the symmetry of it all. I had once been a woman nearly erased from her own life, controlled by people who underestimated me. Now, I was at the apex, entirely in command, steering the ship exactly where I wanted it to go. As the meeting wrapped, I rose from my seat, gathering my notes. "Let's get to work," I said simply. No dramatic speeches, no flourish, just the steady, unshakable truth of a woman who had reclaimed every inch of her power. When the doors closed behind me, I paused for a moment in the quiet hallway, letting the weight of it settle in my chest. I had come full circle, not back to where I started, but to a place entirely my own. And this time, no one else held the keys.